Hello there, English 315 online students. This is your professor, Michael Martin. I am going to give you a brief setup of Beowulf and kind of tell you a little bit about the course in terms of how we've structured it. So very briefly, the readings are going to be somewhat heavy with an essay due roughly every other week. So this week, familiarize yourself with the work, look over the syllabus, look over Moodle, listen to this lecture, and pick up your book if you haven't done so already. So we're using this book. I'm doing this lecture in my office in Thibodaux. You can always reach me here. I'm in Pelche 246. You have my office hours as well as phone number and email. You're using the Broadview Anthology of British Literature, Volume A, and we're starting off with Beowulf. I'm wondering whether you've read this before. Let me move that a little bit over. There you see some of the original manuscript from the burned library version of Beowulf that was found by accident in England. And we think the Beowulf manuscript is from roughly 1000 CE. This is an oral tale, and I want to just give you a little bit of background on it. The Beowulf epic, basically covers a legendary king. I'm guessing you know this. I'm guessing you know Beowulf from pop culture. I believe it was the Angelina Jolie movie that was made a couple of years ago. And I'm wondering whether you've studied this in another context before or another course before. For me, I'm rereading it, and the thing I wanted to mention is that it's a long piece. I apologize. And if the readings are too heavy this semester, I'm doing all the readings as I'm rereading all the readings as I'm assigning them to you. I will certainly abridge the course. I don't want to overwhelm you. It is an English course, and it is a 300 level English course. But at the same time, I realize you have jobs, children, other classes. So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about Beowulf. You might know Beowulf as the legendary figure in Danish culture, and that's right. This book, this oral story, it's an oral tale that was written down, it was probably told for several hundred years. If you would, when you read the Beowulf epic, be sure to read, and any other piece that I've assigned this semester there, I'm trying to get a little, there it is. Be sure to read the prefatory note that gives you the long history of a given text. I don't want to overemphasize an historical methodology this semester, but I think a little history helps, a little bit of context helps. So the Beowulf manuscript that you're studying was an oral tale written down in Old English and then translated into modern, what would you call this, prose or poetry. Beowulf is going to have three major battles. I'll give you about halfway through. In terms of the first one, you know the main antagonist, or the one that you'll certainly remember from your reading of it in high school, is Grendel the monster. And I'm interested in this concept of monsters, and I also want to teach this piece as a representative of the epic tradition. But when I think about monsters, and I think about Grendel, and I think about the adversary, Beowulf, unlike other epics, he does not seem to be part god. There are gods in other epics. I'm thinking of some of the Gilgamesh epic. I'm thinking of some Indian the country epics. Beowulf has some elements of the epic as a genre. A worthy quest. Each battle gets harder and harder, right? And so think about the story in terms of what you already know in terms of your cultural repertoire. And that's what the assignment this week, the reading response is. Do you think of other tales when you read the Beowulf epic? Which stories are you thinking of, and why? So in essence, though, going back to the notion of the monster, the epic story has the protagonist male. Many of the readings this semester will be male-based, for better or worse, going into a series of adventures that gets harder and harder, fighting monsters that are greater and more grandiose each time. So I'm looking at section 19, and we'll just call them sections. And I'm looking at the first maybe 10 lines, and again, this notion of monsters, like this antagonist that he has, and it's easy to forget this if you haven't read Beowulf for a while, or even if you don't know it, that he's going to not only battle Grendel, But the female archetype of the monster, that's what really interests me. Listen to this for a second. The men are sleeping in halls. They sank into sleep. One paid sorely for his evening rest, as he'd often happened when Grendel guarded that gold hall, committed his wrongs until he came to his end, died for his sins. It was soon all too clear, obvious to all men, that an avenger still lived on after that enemy for a long time, after that grim battle. Grendel's mother, monstrous woman, remembered her misery, she who dwelt in those dreadful waters, the cold streams, ever since Cain killed with his blade his only brother, his father's kin. Uh, and then I'll stop there. You can see the Cain comparison, Cain and Abel from the Bible, and Cain being marked. But it's this idea that the monster lives in this cavernous world and comes up to the world living to wreak havoc in this world. I mean, we've seen that repeatedly. You want to call this hell, you can. One of the odd things about the Beowulf epic is that it's strange. It's partially from the Christian tradition, which is a bit mind-boggling in terms of history, but it's also Beowulf is from a pagan tradition too. The idea of these creatures, these beings, references to prayers to Odin, for example, are incorporated within it. So there's a strange synthesis of the Christian and the pagan traditions in English culture of the time. England was being assimilated and had been generally assimilated into Christianity by this time. But if you look at the way that the monster is depicted, it's, she's in misery, she's in dreadful waters, cold streams. I think of where Beowulf has to go fight her, and this is the second battle, right? So you're going to have Grendel first. Don't want to give too much away with that one, and then you'll have Grendel's mother, and so it's interesting to have a female monster who lives in these dark, cavernous worlds, and you can certainly look at that in terms of I think that the psychological symbolism of a subterranean place, maybe in the human psyche, maybe the reference to hell as a psychic dimension in Christian thinking. And I love the descriptions of it. One of the options I may use next week for the essay would be monsters and the portrayal of monsters and the language used for monsters within the Beowulf epic. I think it's going to feel rather immediate. I think it's going to feel like it's not too remote from contemporary portrayals of the monstrous or horror in our worlds. This piece, as you read it, I've just reread it, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. The only things that I think will throw you off are these non sequitur, I don't want to call them digressions, about different male heirs or different male warriors or females mourning or doing things like that in between the main story. So you know the main story. Beowulf's rise to power, Beowulf's strength as a great warrior, Beowulf as the equality or the balancer for a monster that's wreaked havoc. And like there's always this balance, right? So the epic hero has to recreate social balance when there's something that threatens it. And Beowulf, as a ruler of the Geats, or I should say, he's not the ruler, but as a lord of the Geats, he's trying to recreate that equilibrium in the social. The monster threatens the social, right? And he's giving back this favor. But as I said, the things that at least threw me off as a reader would be the digressions. And if you think of Beowulf as a long line of text or oral stories that were told, we don't get the full context. The footnotes will really help. They'll tell you what females mourning what, who are the ring bearers, who is whom. There's so many H words that they'll throw you off. But if you remember, we'll get back to the story after these digressions at some point, and there will be a next monster, a being, a thing that Beowulf has to fight at each instant, and it'll go on for quite some time. So I think we've hit upon a lot of the main issues. It's an epic story. Beowulf is going to have multiple adventures. Each one's going to get harder. For an epic to work, someone has to be sacrificed. Think about stories you like. Think about The Lord of the Rings. Think about things you know from pop culture. There usually is someone good that's sacrificed for the epic hero to continue on his quest. Once again, I don't mean to use male pronouns, but this is what the world, the literature is at the time for the most part. And so Beowulf was part of our larger grouping of texts. This background will throw you off as you read. It certainly threw me off. There's a nice index at the end of the Beowulf section. Let me see. There's the genealogy section on 131, and there's also a nice glossary or context of material. If you're wondering who is Hrothgar, Hrothgar, he's the aged king of the Danes, beset by Grendel, helped by Beowulf. And if you think of the tribal battles going on right there at the time, I mean, there's this. It seemingly is based upon real world epic phenomenon. This is the Broadview anthology makes the case that this is not fantasy. This is legendary literature based upon real battles and real figures. But Hrothgar is one who would be the Danes to whom Beowulf is returning a debt by returning and creating that, or trying to stop Grendel and recreating a social equilibrium. So he's disrupted, right, by the monster, this figure from the depths of these subterranean worlds. That the symbolism is going to be fascinating. Look at that language. Look at the way the monsters are depicted. Think about this in terms of the epic genre as a convention, and make your way through. The story's going to be streamlined. There will be those digressions, as I mentioned, that will throw you off. The sections are clear, but it's been translated from the Old English into, I think, rather approachable modern English parlance. You will get lost in the names. Who's Frisia? Or pardon me, what's the land of Frisia? I'm looking at section 17. The warriors left to seek their native lands, bereft of friends, to behold Frisia, their homes and high fortresses. Basically, the proper names of places will throw you off. Use the glossary at the end to kind of guide you in this particular story. But one battle to another, Beowulf is going to have to prove his merit and mettle. Watch for the way that he defeats Grendel. After each adventure, the hero will recount his story repeatedly, as if the oral story has to be continued. Think of this as an oral text, and think of the time and the dates. We're trying to create in this course a large development of English literature from roughly 1000 to a little bit before 1800. So we're dealing with hundreds of years, and this is an early form of epic that I think you're going to just find absolutely fascinating. I'll leave you at that. I think I've prattled on a bit too long, but good luck reading Beowulf this week, and I will maybe chat with you next week a little bit with Canterbury Tales. Good luck.